Thank you guys. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to all the organizers of this wonderful conference and for pulling this together and for bringing me to San Diego to open my eyes to what this city has to offer. It really is a beautiful place, and you guys are investing in it in a way that's extremely thoughtful. And so kudos to that. I think, can you hear me? I think one of the things that is universal to all businesses and universal to all things that we create as designers is that we want them to be needed. We want them to be relevant. We want them to be needed. We want them to be relevant to the people that we're creating them for.
And relevancy is, to some extent, the challenge of our time. We are all seeking to create something that is differentiated, that is relevant, that is something people want to touch and engage with, because disruption is the new normal. All of our industries are being disrupted, and I fundamentally believe that design is one of the differentiators that we can leverage in order to maintain a certain level of relevancy. So, interesting, Phil referenced this quote by Nathan Shedroff, and he's a designer, an educator, and author, and he says, as a designer, it's my job to make choices that trigger the right responses. And I love this because it is so much more than what it looks like. It's how it behaves. And we're all here because we fundamentally believe that considered, well-thought form can improve function. We already know that. We're already bought into this idea. But this idea of triggering the right responses goes beyond our products and experiences. And it goes into the way we interact with our partners and the way we behave inside of our places of business. So I want to talk about that today and how we at USAA are attacking this problem of triggering the right responses, both within our membership, but also within our business partners, within our IT partners, so that we can start to change the way that we work, because it's part of our necessary journey. And I love seeing Phil talk because it's like looking into a crystal ball over the next 3 to 5 years, because I'm so much younger in this journey. USAA is so much younger in this journey of transformation than IBM is, but it's very similar. At a slightly different scale, a lot smaller, but very similar. And so for us, we've started to talk about why. And as a designer, why is the most critical question we can ask in many forms. And so for us at USAA, why we do what we do is because we know it's important to make a beautiful experience. It's important to make a beautiful experience, something someone wants to engage with, because that drives quality engagement. It drives return engagement. It drives something that is intangible that we've historically only been able to achieve through our member service reps, that human-to-human interaction. The reason we have such high net promoter scores, which if you don't know is we're one of the top-rated organizations in the world based on our net promoter score, is because of our human interactions. But that's not enough. That needs to be true across every single channel. Every single time I interact with you, every touch point that I have, you have to be consistent. You can't make up for it, for that okay app experience I have, or that okay web experience I have, or that okay physical experience I have with a person. You have to be consistent in every single touch point. And so that is how we get quality engagement. And quality engagement is what we believe creates behavioral change. So once upon a time, we thought, well, just having the best products and services, check, people will become more financially secure. We'll publish a whole bunch of thought leadership and put out these articles, and then they'll get more educated about why they should be saving and not spending that money on a PS3. Not true. People don't change their behavior because you publish an article. It is through behavioral change that you're actually going to increase financial security. And behavioral change is all about these little nudges that you get over time. And that is how we change not only the way that people engage with our products and services, but the way that they engage with their own money. And that's the real goal. That's our why. And so you all have to find your own why. And it is out of this root of knowing that our why is not about, I'm going to sell more products. It's not about, I'm going to get you to sign up for one more thing. It is, I really want you to genuinely be more financially secure, that we're able to make really different choices. Choices that sometimes say, no, you shouldn't get this thing. You shouldn't buy that car. This isn't the right product or service for you. And that, for me, is the measure of a good company that actually has their customers or their members at heart, is to be able to say, I'm going to not do what's right for me to do what's right for you. And as designers, we know that that's something we want to focus on. So it's not just us that start to think that design is important. A lot of people are starting to agree with us. We have said for years, for decades, at different consultancies and agencies, design is your differentiator, you should invest in this, and people have actually started to finally believe us. And so that's why so many people are going in-house, right? And the agencies are having a challenge because of it. 42 design firms have been acquired in the past couple of years. And almost every executive at every major corporation says that customer experience and the things that design helps differentiate are key to how they're going to move forward. And these stats are actually a little bit old. You can bet that it's further along than this. And so if people are fundamentally agreeing, then we have to say, how are we going to then behave within these organizations to drive this relevancy? So a Jeff Bezos quote here, and Amazon has interesting culture, but you can say one thing for sure, they are very relevant right now. And he says, if you only do things where you know the answer in advance, your company goes away. And so what he's talking about there is innovation. Key word right now, everybody wants to talk about innovation. But really, when we talk about innovation, it's from the perspective of design. I'm not gonna make a new thing just for the sake of it. And what I see over and over again is corporations creating an echo chamber. They're pulling in the same ingredients, that they have historically, and so they're coming back with the same products or services, or a variation thereof. And so we shouldn't be creating innovation for its own sake. We need to fill unmet needs. And this means breaking outside of our echo chamber. This means listening to our customers in a way that we all fundamentally believe in, but is often hard to bring to businesses, to bring to education, and to bring to civic life. The other challenge that we see over and over again are people having a top-down or an executive-driven set of initiatives. And so you end up designing for that customer of one, and it's the hippo, right? The highest paid person in the room. And so when these moments happen, it's each of our responsibility as a designer to stop, to remind them who the true customer is, to listen to their requirements and then reframe them. And Phil had a great story about this in that idea of, oh, I want a one-click experience. That might not actually be the right problem statement. That might not be the right challenge. So how are we going to, at any time that these things come up, and they always do, we take that and reframe it for our stakeholders. And then the third challenge that I see oftentimes in corporations is people operating from the gut. We're all hired for our experience. And in many cases, these executives that we are serving have to make decisions within 30 minutes. You have been spending all this time on this project, they get 30 minutes with you, and they have to make a decision about this product. That's their day. It's broken up into these little tiny increments and segments. And the pattern recognition that comes through experience is very valuable. But if you're using that as an excuse to not go ask those fundamental questions, to not drive back to why, whether you be an executive or whether you be a product owner or whether you be a designer, you're failing our core values, because our core values are all about that why. And it's through pushing the question that you're going to get to the right answer. So again, we come back to, as a designer, it's my job to make choices that trigger the right responses. And the reason I love this statement is because it's not just about the interface. It's not just about the experience. It's about what are the response I want from my stakeholders. How am I going to communicate with them in a way that makes them feel heard, that makes them feel listened to, that gets me the extra time that I need to go and think about this stuff, that triggers the right responses in my partners. All too often, we're supposed to develop the thing that's the easiest, that's the most technically feasible. And it's when you engage people at a deeper level, this collaboration, that you're able to drive that conversation beyond what's easiest to develop and into what is the most value. So how are we doing that? We're doing that through 3 really familiar tools that you're gonna know: listening, building empathy, and collaboration. Listening applies not only to our members, not only to our customers, but applies to each other. Building empathy is a fresh ingredient. You always have to refill that cup. Empathy is not a stagnant thing. You can't build it once and then say, oh, I understand that person. I know exactly how they feel. And then you walk away. No, it always has to be refreshed. And collaboration is driving that diverse opinion into a conversation. And through these 3 things, you're going to maintain relevancy because you've always got fresh ingredients. Your gut gets stale. Your historical knowledge lags. But these 3 ingredients are how you are always refreshing yourself and refreshing your organization to maintain that relevance. And so we ideate. We ideate at the lowest possible fidelity. And this is one of the things that causes consternation within a lot of organizations because they want to jump to the solution. And they believe that oftentimes this is a form of slowing the process down. If you haven't already experienced this in your professional life, as you go into large corporations, you will experience it. That ideation, it takes too much time. Research, the listening, it takes too much time. We heard it talked about earlier today. But if you're doing it the lowest possible fidelity, you're spending an increment of the time and energy and money versus developing the thing and then asking later if it's relevant. The millions of dollars that it takes to develop physical software, software or physical experiences or spaces, it makes so much sense to do this at this lowest fidelity. So it's not necessarily just about how many iterations can I do. It's about how low fidelity can I do them and what's that minimal possible investment. A lot of people like to talk about minimum viable product. Minimum viable product is great. It's a wonderful concept, but it's still about delivering something to market. And you could be delivering something that isn't relevant. You could be delivering something that isn't answering the root need, isn't answering the core behavior that you're trying to change. And so, jumping to MVP, jumping to development, whether that be software or a physical experience or service design, jumping to that solution making is not always the answer. It is if you do it at the lowest possible fidelity and test and iterate. One of the rules that I have within my teams is you should throw away your first idea. It's usually crap. And it's all about building momentum. And all too often, what we see in large organizations, and I inherited about 100 designers when I joined this company, and we've since grown the team by an additional 150. What we see all too often is people are scared to put that first thing out there. They're scared to drive that momentum forward. And they're waiting for their leader to tell them what the right thing to do is, especially in our organization, a very top-down because of our military heritage. Some of that is good, some of it comes with some baggage. And so what I often do is encourage my directors to make the first sketch, put the first sticky note in the concept garden, and then call it crap in front of everybody. Because your job is to create momentum and to push forward this idea that it's okay to throw things away, especially at that lowest possible fidelity. And then iteration. We talk about iteration within design, and this is actually a symbol for Agile. We talk about iteration within Agile. And this is often a conflict, because we find that organizations, whether they be making software products or physical products or service experiences, want to move further and further into an Agile experience. Design fits with Agile, it doesn't always fit in Agile. And that's a really controversial thing for me to say, especially within the four walls of my business. But it fits the premise of Agile. It fits the fundamental framework, which is all about collaboration, which is all about quick learning. And so when people start to talk about Agile, they get far too wrapped up in the software development process, in the Scrum meetings, in the backlogs. And yes, we have to interact with that. We have to make a plan for how we're going to feather in with that. But if we're leaving the premise of Agile, the kind of core fundamentals on the ground in order to execute, we're failing. We're failing the design process and we're failing the Agile process. So how do we bring that iteration forward? Part of it is acknowledging that there are different levels of rigor. And so these aren't formal kind of ways of talking about rigor, but it's really valuable for me to say it depends. And that's why it's so important to have design professionals at the table, because it's through our experience that we know the methods to use. Is this a problem space that we have no understanding of? So we need to go and do deep, immersive discovery that is front-loaded, and admit that we need to do some of that. Is this a completely new product space? Is this a customer type that we've never dealt with or served before? Do we have some assumptions that we need to blow up in this space? Perhaps then we need to go and do some immersive discovery. Is it a well-known space that we want to dig in further to? And there, perhaps you can just do some hypothesis proofing. And all of this is this idea of flexing your level of rigor. And it's only by knowing what true rigor is and having that design background, not just design thinking, but design practitioner background, that we're able to know how to flex this scale. One of the most frustrating things to me is when someone says, oh, I did design thinking, and they did one-day workshop. Yes, technically you did some design thinking, but is it getting you the outcomes that you want? Probably not out of that one-day workshop. So how do we make sure that we're standing up for the rigor that's required to make the best products and services and experiences that are going to actually improve our members or our customers' touch points? Here's one of the ways that we're doing it. And this is a loose framework that we're using to talk about these go, no-go points. So we start with this idea of a problem statement. And this is something the business usually brings and says, I want to solve this. I want to rethink bill pay. I want to drive more people to have a rainy day savings account. Whatever that problem is. And all too often, that product owner is putting their own frame around it. So one of the first things we do is try to reframe it. We reframe it through that research and insights. And this is where we apply a idea of how much rigor do we really kind of implement here. Is this something that we don't know anything about and we need to dig really deep, or is this something that we can go and do a week of guerrilla research to understand more enough? And that's where we say, okay, your problem statement was great. Thank you for that. We've reframed it as a value statement. Not what is the problem you want to solve, but what is the value we're going to deliver to our membership? What is the value that this person is going to experience, and why does it matter to them? And just that exercise changes considerably. You saw Phil talk about it in his hills, not unlike that. And oftentimes, this is something that can go into the backlog. It may end up in the backlog as an epic or a theme, but we have that ability to tie this value statement back to our normal processes, back to something that's really comfortable for folks, like a backlog, but drive a different conversation around it. So from that value statement, we can then concept at the lowest possible fidelity. We can say, well, what are potential ways that we might deliver this value to our membership, to our customers? And out of those concepts, we can test and iterate. The pace is entirely based on the size of the problem. And out of those concepts, we can then define the epics and themes that will help us understand what we need to go develop. And from those epic and themes, we can get to some level of detailed design, or as I like to call it, foundational design. That is how we get to our stories, user stories that actually become something that goes into the backlog. You scrum those, they become tasks, and eventually, in our case, they become code. If you weren't making a software product, it might be a different kind of outcome there. But a lot of this really applies. And so what we're talking about is an ever-increasing level of backlog fidelity, from a really ambiguous problem statement all the way down to the detailed task you need to execute in order to achieve this thing. And all too often, what we have historically done is skipped a whole bunch of the steps in the middle. And we're not alone in that. A lot of people do that. A lot of large corporations, a lot of software creators are skipping those steps in the middle. And by relating this back to our backlog, it says, I'm not trying to interrupt your process. I'm not trying to blow up your world and say, you need to, as Phil said, stop the machine, and then we'll go figure it out. But it says, I'm going to work within this construct that is a very well-known best practice and be able to move it forward. And the way that we move it forward are these key activities. And so each one of these starts to present this kind of go, no-go moment where you can say, you know what, our concept testing failed. We have to go back and reconsider how we're getting insights out of our research. Or, you know what, our epics and themes aren't at a fidelity that people can understand. So let's go back to our concepts and say, how do we redescribe this in a more meaningful way? And these key activities are one of the things that we're starting to, as much as possible, standardize across our design process. And the reason I use air quotes when I say standardize is because I hate the idea of standardizing a design process. But you need these checks and balances to say we are applying a certain level of rigor, and that we're not just going to make the pretty picture that you wanted from us in the past. So what have we been missing in the past? All too often, and I'm not just talking about my organization, I'm talking about organizations around the world that I've interacted with as a consultant as well. I had some friends come over from the UK, some banking friends, and we were talking through their challenges, and they were doing this same exact thing. They were starting with a problem statement, and they were jumping straight to user stories. And they said, what's failing here? And even the Agile teams didn't know their why. And so without their why, they weren't able to create meaningful solutions at pace. And their entire software process was failing. It was stalling out. They weren't actually getting anywhere. They weren't making experiences at a given pace. They were checking off features. We all know what it feels like if you've made software to check off a feature. It feels bad. It doesn't feel like you're doing the right thing. And that is not the way to measure value for our customers or our members, and that's not the way that we should be measuring value for our jobs and what we deliver. So when we miss these steps in the middle, we are losing that opportunity to create relevancy by adding those fresh ingredients. And that's been one of the main things that I've espoused for years to clients, and that I espouse within my current organization, that we have to take these steps in order to gain that relevancy and in order to retain that freshness. So for some of you might be familiar with this. This is a standard Agile diagram. You start with a product backlog. You get that. You take slices of it. You create a sprint backlog. You turn that into an iteration, and out of it, you get a potentially shippable increment of work. And this happens to be a software process, but you can apply it to a lot of things, and more people are trying to apply Agile to all kinds of experiences beyond software. What happens when you skip those steps? Well, when you skip those steps, your product backlog doesn't address the root customer needs. When your product backlog doesn't address the root customer needs, that usually means that your sprint backlog lacks clarity in the stories because you don't know why you're creating the things you're creating. And frankly, if you don't have design assets as well, so you're jumping straight to stories and you're asking someone to come in and make it pretty later, the picture is literally worth 1,000 words. And all of your requirements could be easily depicted by having a prototype or an image in those requirements. Then in your iteration, you get reduced sprint velocity because you've got story ambiguity and stakeholder churn. Oh, that's what you meant when you said this? Oh, I meant something different because you didn't take the time to work through those details. And then you end up with a potentially shippable product that, yes, you could check the box on that feature, but it may not meet your customer's needs or expectations. And so this machine will keep turning if you don't do those steps. But your quality goes down drastically, and therefore your relevancy goes down drastically. So we come back to it depends. Come back to this idea of, is it our job at moments to say, we don't have to stop this machine, but we need to slow it. We do need to slow it and take the time to consider at the lowest possible fidelity, are we answering the right question? Are we understanding the need? Have we done the synthesis to really get the insights that will create a differentiated experience? And so sometimes it requires deep immersive discovery. It requires you to go into the field, to live next to these people, to experience with them their day-to-day. I'll tell you something that happened for me. We were doing some mobile research, and we thought it was research about our mobile app. And of course it wasn't. It was research about people's self-identity around how they think about their financial security. And many of our membership, especially those who are enlisted, are actually the first banked generation in their households. And that reframes for you considerably how you think about communicating with them around financial literacy. And we get so used to taking for granted our terms, our APRs, and our deposits. People say, I don't actually know the difference between a checking account and a savings account. What's the difference? These days, not much. But I think that highlights that the problem you think you might be trying to solve could be reframed for you. And that all too often, when we were trying to create another product, another service, another touch point that was flashy, that was the fastest remote deposit capture, whatever it was, if we're not answering those fundamental questions, if we're not bringing them along and helping them understand their core finances, none of that matters. And so, in this case, some immersive discovery would have been really appropriate. The next level that I would kind of call out is this idea of hypothesis proofing. We all have hypotheses when we're going to research. It's up to you how much you're pushing on them, right? Are you laying them out blatantly, or are you kind of just holding them in the back of your mind and seeing how they hold up? Sometimes it's appropriate to lay them out blatantly. One of my favorite ways to do research is participatory design. And you can do a series of exercises that are bringing your hypotheses to life and learning new things, because it's very different what people say versus what they actually do. And I love discovering those moments of cognitive disconnect. I was doing some research for another client a couple years ago, and we were laying out a physical space, and we asked them to describe in words what they expected to be able to achieve in this space, what activities they wanted to achieve. And they listed out their activities and did some kind of card sort and said, these were the important things that I wanted in the space. And then we did a physical layout of some of the components that would be in the space. You know, tables, chairs, desks, computers, those kind of things. And the things that people wanted to accomplish and the elements that they put in the space were worlds apart. In this case, it happened to be another financial institution, and so we were talking about banking, and nobody put a teller bank. Nobody had a fixed computer, even though they said that that's the way that real financial services got done. And so just coming at things from multiple angles is something you can get to, and you can get a lot of efficiency in this kind of hypothesis proofing. The next level in my mind, and this is kind of a gray continuum, is this idea of a design sprint. How can I contain something as quickly as possible? And there's lean UX, and we keep talking about design sprints. It is appropriate sometimes for incremental improvements, for small feature additions. If you're thinking about a program or a product from scratch in this way, you may be doing yourself a disservice. You may need to dig deeper to say, how am I going to actually differentiate? And you may not be able to accomplish it in 2 weeks. Or if you do, it's a whole bunch of 2-week segments stacked on top of each other, in which case just admit you're not. You're not just doing 2-week iterations. I almost never say it's okay to go just workshop and go. There may be times where that's the right way to solve a problem. People love their hackathons. People love their design workshops. But if you are taking the output of a workshop without validating it and running straight into delivery, you've applied some design thinking, but not enough rigor. And so I propose that if you find yourself in a design workshop, or it became a thing at my company to say, oh, we did a UCD, we did a user-centered design. You didn't do a user-centered design. It's not a object or a thing. No, it's a philosophy, it's an approach, it's an ongoing methodology. If you find yourself doing that, then you know that you need to follow it up with more rigor. So what are the non-negotiables here? We talk to humans. Whether you're doing it in depth up front or to validate things at the end, we talk to humans. Those are some of the non-negotiables in my mind. We ask why and we interpret. So we all know as designers, you don't just say, what do you want? You don't just say, do you like this? Isn't it better? You understand their core motivations, and you are, through synthesis, bringing yourself to the table. Your interpretation is as much a part of the equation as the things the people said. We do not take them at face value. And that's a scary thing for young designers, to bring their whole selves and to know that it's okay for synthesis to be through their lens, intentionally through their lens. We define those needs. We reframe the problem, not as the one-click install, not as the, hey, save more for a rainy day, but as what my true needs are for the members and the users. And then we apply craft. Again, if you're taking things at face value, if you're just doing what people ask for, you're not bringing your whole self. And so I think that all too often it's easy when we talk about design thinking to lose this idea of design practitioners. And the reason Phil has hired 1,600 designers, the reason I've hired an additional 150 is because that practitioner muscle really matters. And so if you don't have those people at the table, expressing their point of view, bringing that creativity, bringing that relentless curiosity that we are all responsible for, you're missing part of the equation. And then we'd be honest with ourselves, right? Did I do the full rigorous version? Did I not? There's a methodology that I've kind of like to call future smash, and it's basically this idea of a standard reframing exercise with a future casting exercise, and you do them together. And so oftentimes I'll say, well, reframing is example, let's imagine a toothbrush as a service. Does that mean someone comes to your house and brushes your teeth every day? Does it mean that you get a toothbrush subscription and it's always fresh? There's a lot of different ways that we've used reframing exercises as designers to historically think about other potential solutions. And future casting is a tool that strategists use to say, what are potential futures in this domain space? Well, let's smash domain spaces together and reframe across them in a future tense. You can do that with a whole bunch of research. You can do that with a room full of collaborative folks. Or, frankly, you can do it in the back of a napkin with yourself. I imagine, retail and hospitality is pushing the banking industry. And so there's a future where there are no tellers. There's a future where I have a social space that doesn't end up feeling like a bank. But getting to those outcomes by yourself versus doing the collaborative, deep dive version of it are definitely two separate things. And so that's why I say be honest with yourself. Know the level of rigor you've applied and set those expectations with your stakeholders. Because some of them, admittedly, when they experience the lowest fidelity or the lowest level of rigor version, they think, that's it. I can just workshop my way to solutions. And it always takes only a day. It's not the case. And so help them understand, help bring them along in that story. People are the key equation here. People are that differentiator for me. So that maintenance of relevancy comes through different activities. That creation of relevancy, that creation of creativity and of fresh ideas comes from humans. And so we are forcing a different kind of paradigm in terms of how we organize our humans. I'll tell you, historically, designers were lone agents, and they often did pixel prettying at the end, once upon a time at my organization. And instead, what we're saying is that you can fit different units of work into a team, but a team is always 6 people. And we're driving that hard line because we need to have a different conversation about how you apply teams. A team is always 6 people. It's a director, it's 4 designers, it's a producer. In our case, that kind of is like a project manager that with design specialties and research specialties. And those designers, those 4 designers, are a mix of skills. From design research, interaction design, visual design, and all of those skills come together to provide value. And you can put a different set of requirements into that bucket, but you can't break up the team because designers need collaboration and designers need leadership. And so if you are a lone designer within an organization, it is your job to seek out your community and to build a community around you. We cannot make our best work. We cannot do our best work in a silo. And if your only touch points are other people who maybe historically haven't valued design as much, are asking you to make the most technically feasible, the fastest thing, you need other people, other voices to help reinforce the value of taking the time for design. And then I'll talk about design culture. Ours is still forming. It's young. We have about 50 designers in Austin, Texas. We have about 160 in San Antonio, and about 30, I haven't done the math on this, in Plano. And we're growing in all 3 of those locations. And in every single one of those instances, there's a different level of maturity of the culture. And in some places, there's folks we have to skill up. And many of them have been asking for this opportunity for a really long time. But just because you ask for it doesn't mean it's easy. And in many cases, there's folks who come from a lot of historical background, but they don't have the knowledge of the company, the knowledge of the membership in the same way. So bringing those 2 groups together is a thoughtful exercise and something I've been focusing a lot of my time on. So I'll talk about some of our emergent culture principles. and they're really still just forming. Ask more, assume less is one of them. I think this applies to each other. As a mother, I can't tell you how often I see my own lessons in patience applying to teams as well. And assuming positive intent is often a challenge in an organization where there is conflict. And so how are you assuming positive intent? Or if you can't assume positive intent, assume no intent. Definitely don't assume negative intent. Be candid, but be kind. Large organizations often tend to have an adversity to conflict. And so we want to drive, actually, conflict. We want to bring ideas together and force them to have a candid conversation. This is true both in critique, that we should have a culture of active critique that isn't about you personally, but is about the work, and you have to be able to divorce those two things. But at the same time, we need to bring a kindness to how we behave, and to know that our interactions matter because we have to interact with these people every single day. Never check a box. This comes back to this kind of relentless curiosity, the asking of why. If you are just checking the box on getting this feature done, if you are just checking the box on that metric that you're being measured by, that's not a definition of success, and it won't stand. And so that's a real sea change in some spaces. Stretch daily. Whether that be the method you're applying and doing something that you're unfamiliar with, or who you're communicating with, or how you're asking for critique and where you're seeking it, every day you have to do something to stretch outside of your comfort zone. And that is how we maintain a level of quality and improve ourselves as an organization. And then the last one is really this idea that design is democratic. There is a lot of hierarchy in large corporations, but I don't care if the best idea comes from the intern, that's what we're doing. And that's the thing that I love about design, is that good design is relatively self-explanatory. It's instantly recognizable. You can look at it and say, I want to interact with that thing. That is the best solution. And so it doesn't matter where it comes from. And that allows a flat organization structure, or a very hierarchical organizational structure, to feel flat, to feel democratic, to feel collaborative, because there shouldn't be titles in design. There should only be ideas and creation. All right, so those are some of our culture thoughts. We're evolving it every single day. And like all things, it's a work in progress. It's something that we're iterating on. Ourselves, our products, our experiences. I hope that you found some value in the way that we're approaching the problem. And if you have any questions, I'd love to talk. Cheers.